Good morning. About a month ago, Pastor Michelle asked if I'd speak to the congregation about stewardship and giving. And I said, what would I have to offer about that? You know, it's a personal thing. It's your own thing, as you deciding what you're going to give to the church or what you're going to give to this and everything else. And I really didn't know what I'd be talking about. But, you know, this fall, we've had a great fall, a great harvest. And I spend a lot of time in a combine and a tractors, and I don't listen to the radio very often, so I just have a lot of time to think. And I came up with an idea that I'm going to explain in a little bit, and hopefully it's going to work for us. First off, I got to give you a little bit of a history. Many of you weren't here, but a lot of you were back in 1996 and 1997 when we had the most horrendous winter we've ever had. It was snow, 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 and of course that led us to the big spring flood of 1997. Nora Church had been threatened by floodwaters on more than one or two occasions, but we were always able to either sandbag or anything like that, and after I think 75 we put up the dike around the church. But in 1997 we realized the dike was not going to hold, the water was going to come up, and that there was a great risk of the church being flooded. Lo and behold, it did get flooded. The water came over the dike. I remember that morning getting called and said the water is starting to go into the church. We need people down there. You know, we didn't have enough people around here to reinforce the dikes or raise anything. Everybody had their other things going on. And I remember walking into the church, and I'm going to describe the church for a lot of you that weren't here at that time. The church sat over where the fellowship hall is. And as you walked in the church, you walked up about 4 or 5 steps to get into the sanctuary area. And then off to the side, there was a steep, narrow stairs that went down to the basement. And that was our fellowship hall. And we had talked about trying to get everything on one level at one time. And we really had been doing some money things, excuse me, some money things to try to get that accomplished. And like I said, we had that basement there, and we knew the church was going to get flooded. So we gathered one day and brought everything up and put it in the church here. We brought all the chairs and everything else we could, but there were some things we couldn't keep, the appliances, the piano, the fuel oil tank, and everything else. Anyways, the water started going into the church. I came in to pull the plugs because we still had the electrical. And as I went down the back stairs, there was more mice coming up the back stairs than trying to get out of the water. But anyways, we got flooded. We had no insurance for that. We, at that time, lost our fellowship hall. We couldn't use our sanctuary because it was full of chairs, tables, and everything else here. And we didn't have church for a couple of months because of that. In the meantime, we had talked about doing an addition to the church and raising everything on one level. Well, that speeded things up quite quickly. Nancy, my wife, was treasurer of the church at that time. And I remember about 1 or 2 days after the church had gotten flooded, all of a sudden we started getting mail of checks. People donating money because this was on national news that the church had been flooded, and people were giving money to help refurbish the church. And I said, well, that means we need to rebuild. And everybody wanted to rebuild. We didn't want to see this church go down. We needed to rebuild. But we didn't quite have the money. We were about $60,000 or $70,000 short at that time. So what did we do? And I was on the building committee at that time, and we decided to have a Sunday to explain what we wanted to do as far as the expansion and have a pledge day. What we did at that time is we asked everybody to pledge money to get this new church there. And we needed $50,000 to $60,000, which is a lot of money at that time. After we got all the pledges, we had more than enough to go ahead. We had people pledging big bucks. We had people pledging little bits. We had one child, I think she was still in elementary school, might have been in junior high. She gave $250 over 5 years. That was our pledge. What are you going to give over 5 years? So at that time, I went to the Harwood State Bank and it says, here's a list of pledges. We need some money now, though. So they gave us a loan, I think it was $50,000 or $60,000, interest-free, on just this pledges. We paid off that loan in 3 years. Everybody that had pledged money at that time came through except for one person is all I know. And that person had some things going on in his life and didn't happen, which is fine. That was fine. So that brings us to today. We're in the same situation here where we're having trouble keeping this church going. Thank you, Michelle. Our donations are down a little bit, and I get that. It's not easy. I started farming in the 90s. My dad retired in 1992. We had a young family. We didn't make any money back there, and things were tough. And I understand it's tough to make a house payment or a car payment or pay for kids for doing this and doing that and everything else. And there probably wasn't a whole lot of money left over for the church at that time because our priorities were a little bit different. And I understand that. I totally understand that. But now I'm in a little bit better situation where farming's got to be profitable and stuff like that. So I've stepped up my donations and tried to do what we're doing here. So we had a harvest this year, was unbelievable. Everybody remembers this spring. April was just terrible, terrible. Snowstorms for Easter. May didn't start much better. We were so slow and so late getting into the fields. Typically, we usually like to start farming on April 20th because that was my grandfather's birthday. It's also Adolf Hitler's birthday, if you want to keep that as trivia. But that was always our day. Well, we didn't turn a wheel till after May 20th. We were a month behind. But this year, the weather turned nice. It was warm. Things caught up. We got rain when we needed rain. And we had probably the best harvest that I've ever had in my lifetime. It's one of those once-in-a-lifetime harvests as far as grains, corn, soybeans, and sugar beets. We've just had a fantastic, fantastic year. And as I'm sitting out in the tractor or the combine talking or thinking about this, I says, what can I do or what can we do to help and be thankful for this harvest that we've had, the great harvest that we've had. So we as a family sat down here a couple days ago and came up with an idea and a plan of how we want to keep this Nora church going. I grew up in this church. Some of the other ones grew up in this church. A lot of people have come afterwards. In 97, a lot of those people that gave all this money that kept the church going are no longer with us. Most of them are out in the cemetery out here. I've got great-grandparents buried out there. My father, my mother's buried out there, an aunt, an uncle, and one day, hopefully not too soon, that'll be my final resting place also. So it's really important that we keep this going and trying to how do we keep this church going, because 25 years ago people stepped up and gave pledges to get this church where we are today. So we came up with a plan, and we're going to call it the Great Harvest Challenge, because it was a great harvest. We as a family, the Rensvold families, would like to pledge $10,000 to Nora Church on a pledge that anybody that would pledge an amount, we will match that up to $10,000. So if you give $500, we'll match $500, so every dollar is going to be $2. But there's one very, very important rule to this. That money that you give or pledge has to be above and beyond what you're normally giving. Because if it's not, we haven't accomplished a whole lot. We need people to step up and give a little bit more. If you give $10 a week, maybe you can give $20 a week. Well, that extra $10 a week is $500. That $10 a week is going to turn into $1,000 because that $1 is going to be $2. And nothing would please me more than on December 31st of this year is to write a check to the Nora Lutheran Church for $10,000. That's all up to everybody, whether you're sitting here, online, getting our newsletter, whatever. It has to be above and beyond what your normal giving is. And we're going to open this up to anybody, not only members of our church, people that watch us online, people that get the newsletter, former members. There's a lot of members that were members here that have moved on and maybe don't have a church or have a different church or something like that, and they want to see that Nora continues. This isn't going to have to be a one-time $1 pledge. You can pledge anytime between here and the end of the year. And we're going to have pledge cards, and we don't want them filled out today. We'll have them filled out between here and the end of the year. And you decide what you're willing to go above and beyond what you've normally been giving in the last year. The council's not going to know what you pledge. I don't want to know what you pledge. Pastor Michelle doesn't want to know what you pledge. It's going to be up to you and one person. That's our treasurer, Kim, because somebody's going to have to keep track of all this stuff. And as your pledges come in, she'll give us a total at the end of the year, and if it's $10,000, we're going to write a check for $10,000 at the end of the year to match that. Now, you don't have to give it at one time. You don't have to give it quarterly, monthly. If you want to give it $10 a week, $20, whatever the case may be, you want to write it twice a year, give it online, whatever you want to do is fine with us. But the pledge is to give above and beyond what your normal giving is. And I know a lot of people do it with cash. And you have a pretty good idea what you give to the church every year. I mean, you have a general idea. So if you want to give cash, we're going to have envelopes in the back and say, hey, our pledge money, just sign what your name is. That'll go to your credit and everything else. Nobody's going to know whether you met your pledge or not. Only you are. It's only you. But if you pledge that, hopefully you're going to come through and want to make sure this church continues on. And you may ask why we're doing this. One of my best friends in the world was Lloyd Ellenson. Some of you may have known him, some of you may have not. He was my neighbor, 30 years older than I am, but we were pretty tight. And I remember 50 years ago, back when I was in high school, so that gives you my age, Nora Church was doing a fundraiser for something, and I have no idea, don't remember what it was. It wasn't for just the church, it was for some other organization. And they were going around asking money, and that's a tough thing to do. People go around and ask money for this, ask money for that. And they asked Lloyd if he'd contribute. And Lloyd made this comment, and I'll never forget it. He says, if I can afford to go out and buy a new snowmobile this year for $1,000, I certainly can afford to give $1,000 to somebody in need. And I've thought about that for years. If I can afford to go with my wife out for supper and spend $100 on a meal, I certainly can afford to give $50 to the Salvation Army so that they can feed 15 or 20 people. If I can afford to go on vacation and spend $200 or $300 a night on a hotel room, I certainly can afford to give $50 to the Churches United so that somebody can have a bed to stay for a week or something like that. It's all about priorities. Do we want to see this church continue? Do we want to step up like the people did 25 years ago? And it's all up to us. When we talk about going above and beyond, I and Eric both will still continue to give our church money. We're not going to just say this is our donation. We're going to continue to give what we normally give. So this is going to be our above and beyond. They were supposed to be here this morning, but somebody got a little bit of a fever this morning. But we've already got 2 donations. Remember I talked about that one girl that gave $50 for 5 years? That was hard for somebody 25 years ago to give $50. But we already got 2 pledges. I already dropped one here, sorry. And we have a pledge card. And it says, I would like to continue to support the North Lutheran Church by participating in the Great Harvest Challenge. I pledge to contribute $100 to help spread God's word in 2023. I also acknowledge that this pledge will be above and beyond my normal giving. Easton Rensvold, Jackson Rensvold. That $100 just turned into $200. What a great teaching moment it could be for kids. You know, you talk about $100, but that's $2 a week. It's a pop. It's a pop. If you normally give $500, $10 a week, that's a lot. But to give another $10, isn't that hard? That's $500. That $500 is going to turn into $1,000. Every dollar you give is going to be $2. And like I said, I would never, I would very be happy to write a check for $10,000 at the end of this year. Nothing would make me happier. Because that means that everybody here and online and reading our church newsletter wants to see Nora Lutheran Church continue. We're struggling a little bit. We need to step up. It's not something that's just happened overnight. It's been going on for a while. But like I said, this is our way of helping you make some donations and stepping up and pledging to give, to make sure this church sticks around for the next generation. It's our turn. We've got a lot of kids that hopefully one of these days, 25 years from now, they'll say, you know, they stepped up back in 2022. Make sure this church is still around. Like I said, we're going to hand out some cards here. They'll be in the back. Don't make a decision today. Don't make it tomorrow. Think about it. We've got to the end of the year. What are you willing to give? What are you willing to give up? We need to keep this church going. And this is one way of doing it. And like I said, I'd be happy to write that check. And if I write that check, that means everybody else in this congregation, online, is also willing to make sure this church stays on tap. Like I said, you don't have to write it as a one check. You can give it through the course of the year. Give it twice a year, 3 times a year, whatever. And it's not a whole lot. $10 a week, that's $500. That's $1,000 that's going to the church. Anybody have any questions? It's our challenge. We're going to call it the Great Harvest Challenge. Whether we do this again, who knows? Don't know. But this will get us through a couple, 3 years at least. Get us momentum going. Hopefully build the church. If people see that the people of this church are willing to keep the church going, are willing to fork over some money to step up, maybe we'll grow the congregation. You know, we've got a lot of younger people here. We need to keep it going. I'm going to hand out these cards. Take them as you want. We'll have some in the back. It's up to you. Thank you.